Now, on to our next performer. Her name is Karen Golden. Her story this evening is called $5 Dent.
The year was 1989, and I had just gotten my master's degree in communication research, and I realized that I didn't want to work in that field. And so I did the next best thing. I became an apprentice at a musical instrument repair shop, Sherm's Repair in Flint, Michigan. I'd been on the job for 4 months when at 9 o'clock in the morning, the minute our store opened, a gentleman walked in the front door wearing a very finely pressed light blue suit with a tie, and he was frantic. He said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're open. I have a really bad problem." And then he proceeded to open up a beautiful, pristine trumpet case. And inside was a beautiful, pristine trumpet. He picked up a rag and he polished it, and then he pulled out the trumpet and he said, "Last night I was practicing when I accidentally hit my trumpet on my music stand and I got a dent right here." I reached out to take the trumpet from him, and he said, "Don't touch it with your fingers, you need a rag." And he gave me a rag, and then I picked up the trumpet, and I looked at it, and sure enough, there was a very tiny dent somewhere around the curve, just after the bell is attached to the trumpet. He said, "Do you think you can have it repaired by 5 o'clock this afternoon? You see, I'm playing at this gig tonight, and I've got a solo, and I'm going to be standing up in front of the whole band, and I don't want anyone to see how clumsy I am because everyone can see this dent." I looked at the dent and I said, "It's no big deal. I can have that fixed for you by 5 o'clock. He said, "How much is it going to cost?" And I said, $5. He wrote his name on a piece of paper. His name was Matt, and then he walked out the door. I held that trumpet in my hands, and I saw that tiny dent, and then I remembered that just the week prior, I had had my first lesson in dent removal. I learned that there are 2 ways of getting a dent out of a trumpet. The first way involves taking out a very heavy crowbar, attaching it to a vise, and putting on just the right size of a dent removal ball at the end of the crowbar. The second method involves taking a tiny dent removal ball, shoving it into the bell of the trumpet, shaking it, and voila, the dent disappears. I started weighing these 2 options. Very heavy crowbar, tiny little dent ball. I'll go with number 2, the tiny little dent ball. And so I found just the right size ball. I put it into the bell of the trumpet and I shook it, and voila! By 9:20, the dent was gone. But I couldn't get the ball out of the trumpet. And I started to shake the trumpet and shake it, and it was then that I realized that I had forgotten the most important part of the lesson, which is that you can't use the tiny dent ball remover technique unless the tube is open from both sides, whereby you can push the ball out in case it gets stuck. Now let's see. 2 weeks before that, I had my first lesson in soldering, and it seemed easy. I would just turn on the Bunsen burner. Now, every repair technician has a Bunsen burner on their desk. I would just turn on the Bunsen burner and lightly heat the trumpet bell until the solder became soft enough that I could remove the bell, and then I could just get the dent ball out. No problem. And so I lit the little light on my desk. I took out the trumpet, and I started to very carefully melt the solder on the bell. But I hadn't actually learned how much heat to apply to the bell in order to remove it. And the next thing I knew, the bell came off, and so did one of the keys, and then the thumb rest came off, and then the spit valve. And the next thing I knew, there were pieces of trumpet all over the desk. I turned to the gentleman sitting next to me, who was also an apprentice in the repair shop, and I said, "Joe, what am I going to do?" And he said, "I've never fixed a trumpet. I have no idea." I mentioned to you that it was 1989, right? This is before there was YouTube videos or the internet or, any of that kind of stuff. I was going to have to use the old-fashioned method, where you look in a big repair manual to figure out how to fix something. And I had never studied the anatomy of a trumpet. I had no idea how to put the thing back together. And so I began leafing through the book until I found the page that showed the perfect trumpet. It seemed really complicated. And I couldn't figure out what part to put on first. The key, the spit valve, the bell. By noon, I thought I had it figured out. And that's when I started, very carefully applying more heat and more solder in order to put the trumpet back together. It took me 3 hours. But finally, I did it. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had gotten that trumpet back together, and now I was at the stage of polishing the trumpet when I noticed that in all of my efforts to put the trumpet back together, I had burned a hole in the lacquer about this big. I had never done lacquer repair, and I had no idea how to fix the hole. Now, one thing I didn't mention to you is that this was December in Michigan, and it was 30 degrees below zero. This is an important fact for the next part of my story, because when I took the manual off the shelf on how to repair the lacquer of a trumpet, the first thing I noticed is that you need a hood when you are applying lacquer because it's extremely toxic. And we didn't have a hood in our shop. Therefore, the only place I could spray the lacquer was outside. 30 degrees below zero. I took the trumpet outside and I took the lacquer, and then I began to do a kind of a dance, a kind of a heating the trumpet and spraying the trumpet at the same time until finally I heated it just enough for the lacquer to stick. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh, I was so relieved to have the trumpet back together when I stepped into the shop and I realized that I had set Matt's trumpet case a little bit too close to that Bunsen burner. And I burned a nice big hole in his case. It was 4:15. Where had I seen that case before? That case. And then I remembered. Just 2 weeks prior, I had ordered that exact same case for one of our customers. And I remembered that she lived very close to our shop. And so I phoned her and I said, "Hello, Amy, I have a proposition for you. I'd like to buy back that case that I sold you 2 weeks ago for double the price if you can be here in 10 minutes. She agreed. And when I hung up the phone, it was now 4:30 and the clock was ticking. And 10 minutes later, she came back with that trumpet case. I paid her $100 cash. I put all of Matt's things into the trumpet case. His trumpet, his mouthpiece, a spit rag. I polished that trumpet, and exactly 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang, ding, ding, and Matt came into the shop. He said, "Do you have my trumpet?" Of course I do. It was just a $5 job after all. I opened up the trumpet case, I took out his rag, and I polished the trumpet, and then I showed it to him. He looked at his trumpet and he said, "Oh, I know it was not really such a big deal, but for me, it means everything to have a perfect trumpet when I play my solo tonight." "Hey, even the case looks brand new. You know, when I brought you the case this morning, there was a big scratch on the front of it. Thank you so much for taking out that scratch." He reached his hand in his pocket and he took out a crisp $5 bill. "Thanks. Good luck on the show tonight." When he closed the door, I was sweating. It was 5 minutes after 5. Now, I hadn't actually blown it. Well, in a way I did. I realized that I had blown it on my career as a musical instrument repair technician. That was it. I was not cut out for that kind of work. But I've been telling that story ever since.